I was holding a jar of strawberry preserves when I heard my son say it. Through the thin pantry wall, calm as anything, he told my daughter the back bedroom could be cleared first. Nobody needed my sewing things, he said. And she answered that the lot was worth more than the house, once I was settled somewhere smaller. They were dividing up my home. The home my husband and I built with our own hands. They spoke the way you split a check at a restaurant. And they were so certain. They talked as if I were already gone, and the only question left was when. I did not drop the jar. I set it down very gently, and I made myself breathe. I am 71 years old. I have buried a husband and raised these 2 children. And standing in that pantry, I understood something they did not. They had made one mistake. They assumed I wasn't listening. I have lived in the same house on Maple Street for 43 years. My husband Frank and I built it the summer I was 28, back when the street was half gravel and the maple by the gate was no taller than I was. I know the sound every door makes. I know which floorboard in the hallway sighs when you step on it wrong. So I suppose I should have known, that Sunday afternoon, that the house was trying to tell me something. It was a family dinner. The kind I had looked forward to all week. My son Daniel came early with his wife Sharon. My daughter Carol arrived with her own daughter, my granddaughter Emily, who is 24 and the only one of them who still calls just to ask how I am. The kitchen smelled like the roast I'd been tending since morning. For a little while, everything felt the way it used to feel. I will tell you now, so you understand the calm I managed later, that I was not quite as defenseless as they believed. I had reasons to trust the ground beneath my feet. But I am getting ahead of myself. I went to the pantry off the dining room to fetch a jar of preserves. And through the thin wall, I heard my son and my daughter talking in low voices. They thought I was still in the kitchen. They were not talking about the roast. The back bedroom can be cleared first, Daniel said. It's mostly her sewing things. Nobody needs those. And the lot alone is worth more than the house, Carol answered. Once she's settled somewhere smaller, we listed in the spring. I stood very still with a jar of strawberry preserves in my hand. They were dividing up my home. They were doing it calmly, the way you'd split a check at a restaurant. And the part that made my chest go cold was how certain they sounded. They spoke as though I were already gone. As though the only question left was timing. I did not drop the jar. I want you to know that. I set it down on the shelf, very gently. And I made myself breathe. When I came back to the table, every face turned warm again. Daniel pulled out my chair. Sharon told me the roast was the best I'd ever made. Carol asked if I'd been sleeping well, and there was such tenderness in her voice that I almost believed I'd imagined the whole thing. That is the trouble with loving people. You want so badly to be wrong about them. I already knew my 2 children were not the same animal. Daniel has always been the soft one, the one who smiles when he's nervous, the one whose money troubles I pretended not to notice. Carol is harder. She keeps a ledger in her heart, and she had decided, somewhere along the way, that life owed her a balance I had failed to pay. Watching them now, I understood I was not facing one plan. I was facing 2 different hungers that had found the same table. You work too hard, Mom, Daniel said, spooning gravy onto my plate as if I were the guest. You should be resting more. Letting us take care of things. I smiled and said the roast was no trouble. But I was watching now. The way you watch the sky when you've heard thunder but the sun is still out. It was Sharon who gave me the second chill. Near the end of the meal she said, almost to herself, we'll know more after the appointment Thursday. Carol shot her a look. And when I came around to clear the plates, the conversation stopped the way a radio stops when you pull the plug. What appointment, dear? I asked, light as I could make it. Oh, nothing, Sharon said, smoothing her napkin. A dentist thing. Boring. But she'd already slid a small notebook off the table and into her bag, and I saw the cover. It was not the kind of notebook you keep for dentists. I nodded and carried the plates to the sink. But I have raised 2 children and buried a husband. I know the difference between a boring appointment and one you hide. That night, after they'd all gone, I hung Daniel's coat in the hall closet, because he'd left it over a chair like he always did when he was a boy. My hand found something stiff in the breast pocket. A business card. A realtor's card, cream-colored, with a name I didn't recognize. I almost put it back. Then I turned it over. On the back, in Daniel's handwriting, were 3 words. Maple St. Motivated. Motivated. That is a word realtors use for a seller in a hurry. A seller who will take less to be done quickly. I sat down on the little bench by the door and held that card a long time. And I understood that what I'd overheard was not a daydream. It was a plan. It already had a phone number. I did not sleep much. But somewhere in the dark I made a decision that surprised me. I would not cry, and I would not confront. Not yet. If my children had been quietly gathering information about me, then I would quietly gather information about them. I owed myself that much before I broke my own heart. In the morning I made a cup of tea, and I called the number on the card. I did not give my name. I said I was a neighbor on Maple Street, thinking of selling, and I'd heard their office knew the area well. The young woman who answered was friendly and far too helpful. "Oh, we just did an informal valuation over there a few weeks ago," she said. "Lovely older lot. Big potential." Then, brightly, as if it were nothing, "Your son mentioned the paperwork should be ready before the move." Before the move. My move. A move I had never once agreed to, planned by people who shared my blood. I thanked her and set the phone down with a steady hand. Weeks ago. Not a sudden idea born over Sunday dinner, but weeks of conversations I'd known nothing about. Something hardened in me then, quietly, like ground freezing overnight. I told myself to be careful. I told myself there might still be an explanation. But I am not a foolish woman. I have learned that when people show you who they are, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to believe them. I found the rest of it 2 days later, looking for nothing more sinister than my old photo albums. The albums lived in the guest room closet. I went up to find pictures of Frank for the anniversary of his passing. And on the shelf where the albums should have been, there was a blue folder I did not recognize. I almost left it alone. It wasn't mine, after all. But my own name was on the tab, in Carol's neat print. And a thing with your name on it has a way of demanding to be opened. Inside was a glossy brochure for a place called Birchwood Senior Living. Inside was a printed draft titled Durable Power of Attorney, naming Daniel as the person who'd make my decisions, financial and medical. And inside, on lined paper, was a list. A list of my furniture. Frank's desk, beside Daniel's initials. My mother's china cabinet, beside Carol's. The dining set. The piano no one but me had played in years. All of it sorted, divided, claimed. At the bottom, on a yellow sticky note, someone had written, "Mom doesn't need to know until it's signed." I sat down on the edge of the guest bed. I am not ashamed to tell you that my hands shook. It is one thing to suspect. It is another to hold the proof in your lap. To see your whole life reduced to a list of who gets what. They had not even waited for me to be sick. They had simply decided I was finished, and gone shopping in my house while I poured their gravy. But I did not tear it up. That was the second decision that surprised me. I closed the folder and put it back exactly as I'd found it. The brochure at the same angle. The sticky note pressed flat. Because a torn-up folder only tells them I know. An untouched folder gives me time. And time, I was beginning to understand, was the one thing I still controlled. The week that followed was a strange and quiet kind of war. Though only one side knew it was being fought. The concern began. That is the only word for it. Suddenly Daniel was dropping by to check whether I'd left the kettle on, though I never had. Carol called every evening and asked, in a careful voice, whether I'd been forgetting things. When I mentioned I'd misplaced my reading glasses, the way every person on earth misplaces their glasses, I saw her write something down. They were building a case. Not with lawyers yet, but with little stories. A kettle here. A missed call there. The slow construction of a woman who could no longer be trusted with her own life. And the cruelest part was that they did it gently. Soft voices. Worried eyes. So that if I objected, I'd only sound exactly as fragile as they were claiming. What hurt most was how well they knew me, and how they used it. Daniel knew I'd never refuse him a cup of tea, so he came often, and each visit found something to frown at. Carol knew I hated being a burden, so every call planted the same seed. Wasn't I tired? Wasn't it all too much? Wouldn't it be easier somewhere with less to manage? They were not lying about the work a big house takes. They were only lying about why they cared. And a lie wrapped around a kernel of truth is the hardest kind to pull loose. On Wednesday, Daniel called to say they'd like a family meeting on Sunday. Just to talk about the future, Mom. Nothing to worry about. We're bringing someone who can help. Someone who can help. By then I had learned to translate the language of that house. Someone who can help meant someone who can get her to sign. I almost lost my nerve once. It was Thursday, the day of the appointment Sharon had let slip. I sat by the phone, wanting to call Daniel and simply ask him, mother to son, what he thought he was doing. But then I remembered the sticky note. Mom doesn't need to know. They had decided I was a problem to be managed. You cannot reason your way out of being seen that way. You can only outlast it. So I tested them, gently, one at a time. The way you test ice before you trust your weight to it. I asked Carol, on one of her evening calls, whether everything was all right. Whether money was tight. There was a long pause. And then my daughter said something I will not forget. Honestly, Mom? You can't expect to keep that big house forever. It's not fair to the rest of us, watching you rattle around in all that space. Not fair to the rest of us. As if my home were a slice of cake I was refusing to share. As if Frank and I had built it for them, and not for the 50 years of our own lives. The mask did not slip. She handed it to me. I said something soft and got off the phone. And then I sat in the dark of my own kitchen and let myself feel it. All of it. Because grief that you don't feel doesn't leave. It just waits. It was Emily who steadied me. My granddaughter came by Friday with groceries I hadn't asked for. And while she was putting away the milk she said, without quite looking at me, Grandma, I don't know everything that's going on. But I think you should call Mr. Alvarez before Sunday. Before you sign anything they bring you. I looked at this young woman. 24 years old. The only one who had said my name with love and not calculation. And I felt the first warmth I'd felt all week. How much do you know, sweetheart? I asked. Enough to be ashamed of my mother, she said quietly. And enough to be on your side. Now I can tell you what I'd been holding back. Mr. Alvarez had been Frank's lawyer, and then mine. 2 years ago, after a quiet scare with my heart that I never told the children about, he had sat me down and asked what I wanted to happen to the house. Not what the children wanted. What I wanted. And on his advice, we did something whose full weight I had half forgotten until that week. We placed the house in an irrevocable trust. I was the life tenant, free to live there as long as I drew breath. And the successor trustee, the one who would inherit the care of the house, was Emily. I went to see him Saturday morning. I brought the realtor's card. I told him everything. The overheard voices. The folder. The brochure. The list. The power of attorney draft with Daniel's name on it. He listened without interrupting, the way good lawyers and good friends do. Then he took off his glasses. Margaret, I want to be very clear, because I think you've carried this alone all week. They can plan all they like. That power of attorney means nothing unless you sign it. And you will not. As for the house, it has been in the trust for 2 years. Legally, it was never theirs to divide. It is not in your estate for them to fight over. It is yours to live in, and Emily's to protect. I felt the breath go out of me. The breath I think I'd been holding since the pantry. For a week I had carried this like a stone in my coat, certain that to be old and alone meant to be helpless. And here was a quiet man at a wooden desk, telling me that the careful choice I'd made 2 years ago had built a wall around my home without my children ever noticing. I had not done it to defeat them. I had done it because a long life teaches you that love and paperwork are 2 different things, and a wise woman keeps both in order. Then I'd like to let Sunday happen, I told him. I want to hear them say it. And I'd like you on the telephone when they do. He smiled, just a little. I can do that. Before I left, I photographed every page of that folder. I put the realtor's card in my purse. And I drove home to my own house, the house that was mine, and I made myself a good dinner and slept the whole night through for the first time in a week. Sunday came bright and cold. They arrived in a careful procession. Daniel in a collared shirt, too formal for a family lunch. Carol with a binder. Sharon carrying a leather folio I recognized, because the blue folder lived inside it. And the stranger. A polished woman in a gray suit who introduced herself as an elder transition consultant, which is a very expensive way of saying someone paid to help families move their mothers out. We sat at the dining table. The same table on Carol's list. There was coffee. There was small talk. And then Daniel cleared his throat and slid 2 documents across the table, turning them so I could read. Mom, we've been so worried about you, he began. We think it's time to make things easier. This one lets me help with the bills and the medical things, so you don't have to stress. And this one is just an agreement with a realtor, in case you decide the house is too much. Nothing has to happen today. We'd just feel so much better if these were signed. The consultant nodded along, warm and professional. Carol watched me with something between hope and hunger. Sharon did not quite meet my eyes. I looked at the papers a long moment. The power of attorney. The listing agreement. My whole life, made easy, made small, made theirs. Then I reached into my purse and set my own envelope on the table, beside theirs. Before I sign anything, I said, I'd like you to meet someone too. I dialed the phone and put Mr. Alvarez on speaker. And I watched my children's faces as a man's calm voice filled the dining room. Good afternoon. My name is Robert Alvarez. I'm Mrs. Ellison's attorney. I understand there are some documents on the table. I'd like to save everyone a great deal of trouble. The consultant's smile flickered. Daniel said, too quickly, Mom, you didn't need to bring a lawyer into a family conversation. Didn't I? I said. Mr. Alvarez went on, unhurried. The durable power of attorney in front of Mrs. Ellison will not be signed. More importantly, the listing agreement cannot be honored. The property at Maple Street is held in an irrevocable trust, established 2 years ago. Mrs. Ellison is the life tenant. The successor trustee is Emily. The house is not part of Mrs. Ellison's estate. It cannot be sold, transferred, or signed away by anyone at this table. There is, quite simply, nothing here to divide. I have never heard a room go so quiet. The consultant began gathering her things almost at once, the way people do when they realize there is no fee at the end of this particular road. Daniel's face had gone white. "How long?" he said. "How long have you known?" And I told him the truth, because I had earned the right to. "Long enough to hear you measuring my living room from the next room over." Carol made a sound. Half a sob, half a protest. "We were going to take care of you," she said. "No," I said. Gently, because gentleness was the only weapon I had left, and the only one I wanted. "You were going to take care of yourselves. There's a difference." I heard it through the wall. It was Sharon who broke first, and that surprised no one less than me. When Mr. Alvarez asked that the folder be placed on the table, it told its own story. The notes were in Sharon's hand as often as Carol's. The brochure carried her highlighting. The little notebook from her bag was there too, full of dates and dollar figures. The plan, it turned out, had a quiet engine, and it had been idling in my guest room for weeks. Carol cried then. Truly cried. And through it she said the thing I think she'd wanted to say for years. "You always loved this house more than you loved being near us. We grew up and you just kept polishing it." That one landed. I will not pretend it didn't. Because there is always a sliver of something true inside even the most unfair accusation, and a wise woman does not flinch from her sliver. Perhaps I had poured too much of my widowhood into floorboards and gardens. Perhaps. But a flaw in me did not give them the right to sell the ground from under my feet. "You may be a little right," I told her. "And you are mostly wrong. But I would rather talk about that for 10 years than sign your papers in 10 minutes. Emily came and stood beside my chair. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand on my shoulder. And her standing there said everything that needed saying about who in this family had chosen what. Before they left, I told them the trust held one more provision I hadn't mentioned. They went still, braced for a final blow. But it was not a blow. It was the opposite. The trust asked only that the house stay a place the family could always come home to, for as long as they came as family, and not as buyers. "The door isn't locked," I said. "It never was. But you don't get in by handing me a pen. You get in the way everyone always has. By sitting at my table and meaning it." They did not all take that offer, not right away. Carol left angry, and stayed angry a long while, though Emily tells me she is softer now. Sharon I have not seen much of, which is its own kind of answer. But Daniel called me 3 days later. And for the first time in years, he did not ask me for anything. He just said, in a voice that cracked like the boy he used to be, "Mom, I'm so ashamed." I don't know how it got this far. I told him that shame is only useful if it turns into something better. And that I would be on my porch on Sunday, if he wanted to come and start. He came. He has kept coming. Some Sundays he just sits with me and we don't talk about any of it, and those are the best ones. He has begun fixing the little things he used to point at with worry. The loose porch rail. The gate that sticks. He does it quietly now. Not to prove I can't manage, but because a son helping his mother is the most ordinary thing in the world, and we are both learning to let it be ordinary again. It is not forgiveness, exactly. It is something slower and more honest than that. It is a beginning. I am sitting on that porch now, as the sun goes down over the maple frank and I planted the year we married. The house is quiet and warm and still mine. I did not win because I was clever, though Mr. Alvarez might argue the trust was clever. I won because I paid attention. Because when the people I loved told me who they were, in low voices through a thin wall, I had the courage to listen, and the patience not to scream. 43 years I've lived here. I intend to live here a good many more. And if my children want a place in these rooms, they know now exactly how to earn it. Not with documents. With honesty. With the simple, unfashionable work of being family. The maple is turning gold at the edges. The kettle is on, and this time I remembered it. And the door, as I said, is open. It is simply mine to open. That, in the end, was the only thing I ever needed them to understand.